Good afternoon, this side of the room. Good afternoon. All right, my name is Rick Daniels, and I'm the Leadership Advisor for Greece here at UW-Whitewater. I am very privileged and honored to be teaching this guest lecture this afternoon. I was a student of Professor Jennings in 2005 when I took my very first Individual and Society class. And from there, we made a connection as friends, which formed into a professional connection, which led to this appearance here. So I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to be talking about the history of jazz and the influence on the African American community. I am a Greek advisor, and I work in the area of student affairs. So some of you are probably thinking, what does he know about jazz? But what people really don't know about me is that I have a history of jazz education. I graduated with a degree in, or a major in jazz from the Milwaukee Institute of Performing Arts, and then I also went on to study that as a minor at Columbia College, Chicago, for a couple of years as well. So I know a little bit of what I'm talking about here, and I also played in the Jazz Symposium here at UW-Whitewater and represented with that group for almost 3 years. So while my passion is for working with students, I do have a healthy obsession with jazz, and an even healthier obsession with the history that it has to, or the history that sort of encompasses jazz music in African Americans. So how many jazz fans here? Okay, who are some of your, what's your favorite jazz artist?
Listen to smooth jazz, so like whatever they play out there.
Okay, smooth jazz. Okay, good. Jazz fans? Yeah.
Richard Elliott, one of my favorites.
Very nice. John Coltrane. Okay, we're friends now. Absolute favorite artist. Absolute favorite artist. Anyone else? Okay. Well, the reason I asked because I'm going to jump right into this and talk about, sort of give a brief history of jazz. What I have for you now is a tip of the iceberg. This is not the entire jazz history, so if any true jazz fans in the house feel that I'm missing something, it's most likely because I have to cover a wide ground here. And what I really did not want to do was make the presentation too long and too, historically boring for you. It would take an entire semester to cover the entire history of jazz and talk about the true impact. I'm going to try to cover that in about an hour today. And then, of course, with some discussion afterwards. Hopefully won't take up too much of your time. So the title of this presentation is called Ooh Bop Shabam, which is an actual song by an artist called Dizzy Gillespie. We'll talk about the scatting era in a little bit. And it, again, profiles jazz and the influence in the African American community. On our agenda today, we're going to discuss the importance to the black community. We're going to jump into that first. The connection to hip-hop music. I'll be back actually later this semester to talk about hip-hop and its connection to jazz and its influence on the African American community. The history of it, styles and famous artists, and then we'll review. Okay? So what is jazz? Encarta defines jazz as a type of music of black American origin characterized by improvisation, syncopation, and usually a regular or forceful rhythm. Some derivatives are jazz with an A, jazz with one S, and jazzer. Okay? Jazz has sort of a funny history to it. Jazz was the original name. Okay? That kind of there really is no historical definition to where the word jazz came from. There's so many stories that have to do with the beginning. It's one of those subjects that is so wide, people really don't know where it started. They know sort of, some of the first recordings and things like that, which we'll talk about, but the actual title, the jury's still out on after all these years. But the funny part about the word jazz is that the reason that they started calling it jazz is because there was a section in New Orleans called Storyville. Anybody familiar with the Storyville section? Okay, Storyville was the red light district of New Orleans. Anybody know what a red light district is? Okay, the red light district is where you can go and get your women. You can, go. Prostitution was illegal at the time, but Storyville was like the first Vegas, if you will, and it was sort of the Vegas of the jazz era. So what happened in Storyville stayed in jazz music, and because people wrote songs about it, and it influenced the title. Jazz was really supposed to mean just ass. That's documented, okay? And so the reason that they cut the SS off was to sort of jazz it up, if you will, and they didn't think that publications would put it on records, and people were sort of timid about language at that time. Nowadays, you can say almost any curse word you want, with the exception of a couple of them on TV, but in the media around that time, it was very conservative, and so they changed it to the word jazz. The definition explains it as a type of music of Black American origin characterized by improvisation, syncopation, and usually a regular or forceful rhythm. Jazz was central to the development of the Black community, and here's why. What you have to understand about jazz music is that jazz was a voice for African Americans at a time when African Americans didn't have a voice. They were considered the lowest form of a human being at the time. Okay, now we're talking early 1900s here. We just had a campus diversity forum a couple hours ago on campus. Anybody go? All right, you think you know racism, or you think you've seen, some type of racist act. You don't know racism until you go back to the early 1900s. Further, it was worse, of course, but, I mean, we're talking about just a few years off of the Emancipation Proclamation, which really made slavery worse because after the proclamation was signed, the masters convinced the slaves that they couldn't find any jobs, they didn't have any education, and that they were better off working on the plantations that they were slaves. So they were still slaves without the title. So you fast forward a few years up to 1900, in the early 1900s, what we had and what we have always had was our music. And so African Americans at the time really focused on their music for encouragement. There was a message in it, but the message was for us. We focused on it for encouragement. And so jazz was really derived from blues, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But it was central to the development of the Black community because it was really a form of our expression, especially when we didn't have to work anymore, when we were off of our, I don't know if they even called them shifts back then, but when we were done, doing what our assignment was at the time, or working on the plantation, or working some odd job that we could get, and we got together and we started to form what would soon be known as jazz music. It created a sense of musical pride and ownership. Around the time that jazz music sort of was formed or started to be conceived, if you will, the popular music at the time was classical. Okay, classical music was the popular music at the time. You didn't do anything else. If you danced, you waltzed, or you ballroom danced. If you listened to music, it was classical. Nobody danced to the music unless it was like I said before, waltz or ballroom. There was really no way for you to have fun. That was fun for America back then. That was the distinguished sort of fun. But what jazz gave African Americans was a sense of musical pride. This was a way for us to have our own music. We didn't have to play it in the dance halls. We didn't have to play it at the master's party or anything like that. This was for us to play at home. This was for us to have fun with when we got together. And so, again, jazz wasn't completely formed at that time, but what we had when it began was sort of something that we saw as a musical pride, and we took ownership of that. Essential for the future. I put this here because the beginnings of jazz, what I missed? Oh, man, I'm sorry. I think this is my screensaver.
It is peaceful. Not peaceful.
All right, hopefully that doesn't happen again. But anyway, essential for the future. I put this there because jazz was really in its infant stages at the time. And I don't think that the people who were involved, some of the early pioneers of the music, which I'll talk about in a second, I don't think they knew or understood the impact that it had. A lot of people thought that jazz was just a fad. It was just something that, the Negroes do, and when it's over, and then we'll get back to the classical music. If you pay attention to musical history, no older genre likes new music. You ever think, anybody got parents here that think that the music you guys listen to sucks? Yeah? Okay. Their parents thought the music they listened to sucked too. And then their parents and so on. So you had classical music people who didn't think that jazz was going to last. Then the jazz heads, when jazz got older, 60s and 70s, didn't think that R&B and funk was going to last. And those R&B and funk heads didn't think hip-hop was going to last. And in hip-hop, now, there's certain areas or certain people who like a certain type of hip-hop that think the other hip-hop is trashy, and then, it goes on and on from there. And so jazz had to go through that sort of infant stage as well, where people really didn't believe in the music. But as we know, of course, it flourished. Connection to hip-hop music. Jazz and hip-hop are connected through a central bloodline, okay? That bloodline is called improvisation. What is improvisation? What does that mean?
Make it up as you go.
Make it up as you go. Good. Who else? Okay, there's got to be somebody who did some type of theater in here, right? No? Okay, well, we're going to go with that definition. Thank you. Improvisation means to make it up as you go, to go along. Improvisation is what makes jazz jazz. Okay? Now, jazz has a standard form. It's called AABA. And what happens is, when you're playing a song, this is the sort of the standard form. Not every form of jazz follows this, but standard swing follows this form. You repeat the chorus twice, which is the AA. You go to the bridge, which is section B, and you go back to the chorus, which is A. Now, once you complete that standard form, then you go and you have solo. So if we had a 4-piece jazz review, okay? I was a trumpet player. I'm Miles Davis. I was a trumpet player. You were the drummer. You're a saxophone player, and you're a piano or a bass player. We need a bass player, okay? So we would play the song. We play the chorus twice. Then we would go to the bridge, play the chorus once again. Then I take my first solo, okay? And that first solo wouldn't be anything written. And at first, the first early years of jazz, all of the solos were written. Everything was written down. Everything was documented. But people began to play in big bands when they started to form larger big bands or larger combos. People would play in bands as large as this room, with as many people in it as this room. And the horn section would be, bigger than this section here. And so people began to sort of go beyond what was written in their solos and start to play things from, the top of their head. And it started to sound better than what was actually written because it wasn't rehearsed. And that blew people's minds. Jazz took off because of improvisation. And so when it was time for your solo, you would play something that you've never done before. When it's time for your solo, you play something that you've never done before, and so on. And that's what made jazz music jazz music. That's what made people realize that this had something a little bit special, a little bit more special than anything else. Scabbing and freestyling. I want to play a clip for you. I got a couple musical clips for you here. Anybody ever heard of Cab Calloway? All right, Cab Calloway was a jazz musician, and he made up a song called the Scat Song. Anybody heard Hidey, 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 ho? Okay, that was written by Cab Calloway, and he made up an entire song that was pretty much an ode to scatting. And so I'm going to play a clip for you for a few seconds, and you can hear what